China's rise is changing the world. Stay with me as I search for the truth about China that matters to us all. Hello, welcome to Zooming in China. I'm Simone Gao. Today, let's talk about some of the most important elements in the renewed discussion of the origin of the COVID-19. We all know that so far the world has not discovered the intermediate host for the virus that goes from bats to humans. China has not identified patient zero either. What does that mean? Is that significant? More importantly, what are these facts possibly related to the gain-of-function research that's performed at the Wuhan Institute of Virology? And what exactly is the relationship between the Wuhan P4 lab and the Chinese Liberation Army? I will discuss these topics with Dr. Xijin Li, former lab director of the viral disease branch of the Walter Army Institute of Research. Dr. Lin was educated in both China and the US. Thank you, Dr. Lin, for joining Zooming in China today.
Thank you, Simone. Thank you for inviting me, and glad to be with you.
Okay, let's talk about the renewed discussion of the origin of the coronavirus. The Wall Street Journal reported that in 2012, 6 people entered a mine in Yunnan province, Mojiang City in China, to clean up bat wastes, and all of them contracted a mysterious disease. 3 of them died. Scientists from Wuhan Institute of Virology went there to investigate, and after taking back samples from those bats in that mine, they identified several coronaviruses. One of the scientists even wrote a thesis describing this incident. And he said one of the miners was sent to the hospital and his symptoms of coughing, fever had lasted for 2 weeks and he had difficulty breathing. The CT scans of his lungs are the same as those of the current COVID-19 patients. So my question is, if the miner caught what is very similar to today's COVID-19, why didn't that infection spread to more people and became a pandemic in 2012?
Yeah, it was a very interesting study that you just mentioned. The graduate student who wrote the thesis regarding this investigation in the mine shaft, his name is Li Xu, and he wrote his master thesis on this. And basically his conclusion is that SARS-like bat coronavirus was the primary reason that led to the infection of 6 miners who contracted SARS-like viral pneumonia. So it's different from what Dr. Xijin Li talked to the Scientific American Journal when she claimed that those miners will actually die from fungus infection. So the fungus infection actually could be secondary infection after the SARS-like viral pneumonia infection for these miners. So it's a very different story. If we followed these observations, we can see these master students' conclusion is not just like regular studies. His study was also cited by other PhD students as well, later on in other publications as well. So actually it was a common belief those miners actually contracted a SARS-like viral pneumonia. So it's very likely it was due to a virus spillover. So basically this is a small cluster outbreak in those mine workers, right? Only 6 people got infected. And it was actually lethal because 3 persons died, 3 out of 6 died. So it's a serious situation, but it didn't cause a big outbreak because for virus transmitted from bat to human, definitely is a major jump. And the immune system in humans is very different from bat, and also the bat coronavirus does not use human ACE2 receptors efficiently, and so that's why the virus was not adapted to be transmitted in human beings, so it didn't cause a big outbreak. It's just a small spillover.
Okay, so you said those original bad coronaviruses, they're hard to jump directly to human bodies and become highly adapted to the human body and spread among humans to cause a pandemic. Are you saying basically those bad coronaviruses need an intermediate host to jump to and then transfer to the human body?
Yeah, based on the general consensus on zoonotic transmission for viral disease, for a virus in bed to be adapted to human, usually it needs animal intermediate host, right? So, for example, in the SARS outbreak, people identify the civets. They are the intermediate animal host. So during the 2003 SARS outbreak, people can identify civet in the live animal markets in Guangdong province was infected with this virus, and many viruses were seropositive for this virus. And if you look at the MERS, the Middle East respiratory syndrome outbreak in Middle East, and people identify camels were the animal intermediate hosts, right? And then people can find seropositive camels in UAE, in Saudi Arabia, with very high percentage seropositives. So that's why you need these intermediate animal host so that the virus can further adapt it to mammals, right? From bat to mammals, and the virus further adapted to the immune systems in mammals. And then because humans work with these animals, and then people can get infected with these animals' coronavirus, and then the virus further mutated to further adapt it to humans. So it takes a long time for the virus to be adapted to humans from a bad coronavirus.
So as far as I know, so far we haven't identified the intermediate host. Not only that, we couldn't even find patient zero, right? I mean, what could patient zero tell us? We just discussed we couldn't find an intermediate host, but what could a patient zero tell us?
So if we can identify the patient zero, so usually you would understand how did this patient contracted the virus, whether it's through a food, through environmental samples, or through contacting a virus source in the lab, for example. So if we identify patient zero, it helps us to know how the outbreak started in Wuhan. And it will probably also help people to identify an animal's reservoir, right? So, but right now, in more than 1.5 years right now, the Chinese government haven't been able to provide any animal sample that are testing positive for the SARS-CoV-2 viruses. And for those animal samples collected in Wuhan or in a neighboring province, no animal sample were tested positive for the SARS-CoV-2. And so this is a very, very odd situation. Even though people identify some SARS-CoV-2-like coronavirus, for example, people find it in pangolins, in bat, in cat, but those viruses are not progenitor virus for the SARS-CoV-2. They are still quite different from the SARS-CoV-2, missing some very important features.
So I just want to make sure we could not find intermediate hosts. And by identifying patient zero, if there is an intermediate host in nature, for example, it's an animal, by identifying patient zero, we will be able to identify the intermediate host. However, we cannot find patient zero either. So by any means, this middle link of immediate host that the virus can jump from bat to humans are missing right now, right?
Exactly. We are missing critical proof for this zoonotic transmission series. In order for this series to work, you definitely need the progenitor virus. You need an intermediate animal host, and you also need a patient zero to confirm this transmission. And so that's why the Chinese government been promoting the zoonotic transmission series without enough direct evidence. And so they will try to convince the world that it's a spillover. But for spillovers, the virus won't adapt to human so quickly. It won't become a pandemic in such a short period of time. So that's almost impossible.
Okay, this is very critical information. You are a virologist and you have worked in the army, worked in, areas that had great outbreaks. So I want to ask you, is it hard to identify patient zero in a pandemic like this, usually?
It has some challenges, definitely. At the beginning of the outbreak, you may not be able to track who was the patient zero, right? When many people will take a few weeks to manifest their clinical symptoms, and some people go to hospital, and then the public health authorities will realize, oh, there's an outbreak. But through contact tracings, with efficient contact tracings and sample surveillance, people will be able to track who was the first person got infected and how did she contracted the viruses. So that's why it takes some time, but it won't be impossible.
Okay, so do you know any pandemic in which that people just couldn't find patient zero?
There are these kind of outbreaks. People cannot find patient zero because it happens so fast and so many people got infected. It's hard to track who was the original one, just like the MERS coronavirus outbreak in Middle East. And when people realize it happens, it already have so many cases. So on those kind of situations, it's very hard to track. But for the SARS-CoV-2 outbreak, when Chinese government claiming in December it was only dozens of cases, on those kind of stations, usually it's easier to track how did it happen. Yeah.
Yeah. Another question is, could the intermediate host not be a natural one? Not be an animal?
Yeah, that means the virus comes from a lab, right? So if it's not natural. And so that means, yeah, either leak from a lab storage or it's a lab engineered. So there are different scenarios. Yeah, definitely that's another potential. And this is not far-fetched situations.
You know, we know that Xijin Li and her team went to Yunnan in 2012 after that accident and after that incident and collected a lot of bat samples and brought them back to their lab. Not only that, I think they also went to Yunnan again in 2015 and went to bat caves and collected a large sample of bat coronaviruses and brought them back to their lab again. So do you know what they did to those samples?
It was very clear that the Wuhan Institute of Virology became the center of focus because the team from Dr. Xijin Li have conducted a lot of the research related to bat coronavirus. Especially, they've been conducting a gain-of-function study. And those research, a lot of them were not done in a secret situation. They have published the results. For example, they published a chimeric virus. They used the backbone of mouse-adapted SARS coronavirus and then adding the bat coronavirus spike proteins into it, so it become a chimeric. And they found out these viruses now can actually infect human respiratory epithelium cells and even cause lung symptoms on mouse models, right? So it was very clear they are doing this kind of gain-of-function studies in their lab using bat coronavirus. They will try to study how the bat coronavirus can infect different receptors in different species, including other animals as well as humans. So they basically try to understand how bat coronavirus can become efficiently transmitted in human beings. So that's why it's a very dangerous gain-of-function study, and that's why these labs have become the center of focus when people tracking the origin of the virus, when people suspecting a lab leak situations.
I simply don't quite understand, why do we want to do this kind of study? Why do we want to come up with a more deadly virus that the nature hasn't come up with?
That's because some scientists believed through this kind of gain-of-function study, they can understand human immune system better. For example, they assume if you challenge human immune system with a more deadly virus, the immune systems can generate a better antibodies or T cell responses. So when you encounter the virus in the nature, you are better protected. This is one of the scenarios why people are doing this kind of gain of function study. But I have to make it clear to everyone, so far, there's no gain of function study have been proved to bring any effective vaccines for any virus studied. For example, for highly pathogenic H5N1, SARS, MERS, many viruses have been subjected to this kind of gain of function study, but no vaccine has been developed and no treatment has been developed due to these gain of function studies. So it was just a series. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So not only that, as far as I know, the Wuhan Institute of Virology is linked to the Chinese army, and the Chinese military is also conducting this kind of gain of function experiment. Is that right?
So the Wuhan Institute of Virology had a military management division in the past. So this clearly tells the whole world that the institute was related to the People's Liberation Army very closely. But nowadays, this kind of information is no longer exist on the website of this institute. They already take it down. They even took down the information that the United States Department of State sent visitors to the institute on 2018 in the concern of the safety operations in the lab. Right, so they took a lot of information off the website now.
Why is the Wuhan Institute of Virology linked to the Chinese army?
Because Chinese military also are very, very interested in the biotechnologies, interested in the advancement of medicines and using these medicines not only just to treat Chinese soldiers, but also help them develop bioweapons. And it was very clear, it became a military strategy for Chinese military to develop bioweapons. And you can see from many of the influential Chinese military leaders in their publication in the past few years, and they have emphasizing biotechnologies and developing bioweapons will be very important for Chinese military to gain strategic advances. So it's clear they are one. So it's very clear the PLA want the development of bioweapons, and Israeli intelligence has clearly indicated as well that the Chinese military are developing bioweapons. So even though the Chinese government signed up the Bioweapon Convention in 1985, but they are doing it secretly. So the Wuhan Institute of Virology actually co-located with Chinese military medical units. So they are doing research together. That's why WIV, the Wuhan Institute of Virology, in the past has a military management division.
Right. You just said the gain of function experiment can, through research, come up with more lethal viruses and stuff, and that just fits perfectly with the goal of a biological weapons program, right?
Yes, definitely. So not just a virus, right? For military, they are interested in other deadly pathogens. Even the Brucella I just mentioned, it could be used as bioweapon as well. And so when military units, medical units actually co-located with the top virology institute in China, of course, it's very convenient for them to test out different potential viral pathogens and try to see whether they can adapt them, further testing them, making chimeric virus, making potential bioweapons. Yeah, so that's why it's very dangerous for the whole world when you have a top virology institute engaged with military bioweapon programs.
Okay, but I mean, that said, one of the rebuttals of this lab-made biological weapon theory is that this coronavirus was not deadly enough to be a biological weapon, and it seemed that China didn't have much control over it either. It didn't have an antidote either. So based on that, some scientists say this could not be a precision weapon made in the lab. The purpose is to, destroy enemies. What do you think?
Well, bioweapon won't be developed so easily, right? So of course, for an ideal bioweapon, whoever released the bioweapon should be able to contain the virus spreading in the communities, should be able to treat people infected if they want to. They should have the antidote. So that means the world right now definitely don't have a direct evidence that the Chinese military already developed a very sophisticated bioweapon that they can use at will, right? So it's clear the PLA is developing bioweapons, but they may not reach to that stage. And we don't have any evidence the Chinese PLA bioweapon program has successfully generated the SARS-CoV-2 before the outbreak. So far, I haven't seen any document to provide direct proof that the PLA generated the SARS-CoV-2. But what we are saying is that the Chinese military have this bioweapon program, and they are working on the bat coronavirus. They are trying to enhance the virus pathogenicity or transmissibility of the bat coronavirus and try to understand how it can break through species barriers to infect human beings. What we are saying that this part is very clear, but of course we don't know whether the lab in the militaries have been able to successfully generate SARS-CoV-2.
Yeah, so we talked about the danger of the gain-of-function experiment. They can get out of control very quickly. And I heard China, after the pandemic, did not stop the gain-of-function experiment. Instead, there are many labs, local labs in China, are continuing with this kind of experiment. Is that true?
So right now, the whole world is facing a big danger because the Chinese government has announced on May 2020 that they want every province in China to build up at least one lab in biosafety level 3 and probably biosafety level 4 as well. And so this is like a big leap forward for China to build up more biosafety level 3 labs. So that means more dangerous pathogens will be cultivated, will be studied in China. And if China haven't improved the safety operations in their top institute, the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and how do the world be able to trust China can handle more biosafety level 3 or 4 labs, right? So many of these labs, many of hospitals, they have the SARS coronavirus right now. And so more institutes can do more studies on these dangerous pathogens.
Okay, last question. How did the search for the origin of the virus become so hot again? Just a few months ago, in social media platforms, this type of topics is banned. But now I think Facebook and Twitter have lifted the ban, and YouTube is, I don't know, this episode of Zooming in China could be a test for YouTube if they ban us. My documentary movie, The Cover-Up of the Century, has reached millions of people on YouTube, but it was banned. It was yellow marked by YouTube. So why do you think right now this search for the origin of the virus is getting hot again?
I think one of the main reasons was that the so-called independent WHO's investigation in China actually triggers more concerns, making the whole world more interesting to find out the origin of the SARS-CoV. Because the WHO called it an independent investigation. But however, it was very clear that the Chinese government control the scope of the work. They defined the terms of reference, and they decided what sample to be collected. And Chinese scholars and researchers, they collect those samples, they conduct the test, and they do the analysis, and they provide the results to WHO experts. So basically, the WHO experts serve as a panel of critical reviewers. They only provide their critiques, making suggestions, making advice to the Chinese scholars. So to me, it's actually embarrassing for the WHO experts to take the authorship for this investigation report. Because basically the Chinese scholars did the research, right? So you are making critiques only. How can you become the author of this investigation report? And so it definitely is not an independent investigation. And then the conclusion from the investigation made people totally discredit this report, and because they rule out the potential lab leak series, and they also following Chinese government's tune, saying the frozen food could be another route for the SARS-CoV-2's transmission. So I think many scientists and public health officers don't believe this series.
All right, Dr. Lin, thank you so much for joining Zooming in China today again.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation.
This concludes our program for today. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel if you like our production. I'm an independent journalist. I do not belong to any media organization or any entities, so I represent solely myself. Because I'm not part of a big media, I have to take care of the production costs all by myself, and I need your help. If you want to help, you can either donate to me or becoming a sponsor for our program. If you want to become a sponsor, you can email me at info@zoomingin.tv. And if you want to donate to me, the donation link is underneath this video. I'm also on Gab, Parler, Locals, Rumble, Instagram, Facebook, and SafeChat. Thank you for watching Zooming in China. I'm Simone Gao, and I'll see you next time.